Welcome to our special coverage of the Trudeau government cabinet shuffle. Today on the show, we will be joined over the phone by Dmytro Basmat, a political strategist and former spokesperson for the Liberal Party of Canada. And following that, we will be joined by youth journalist Joshua Oliverio and Rayn Asaria to discuss the cabinet shuffle. Joining us now to discuss the latest developments in the federal Trudeau cabinet shuffle, Dmytro Basmat, thank you for making the time.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
And I guess I'll just get started with, what was the most significant change in cabinet today?
Definitely Anita Anand moving from the Defense Ministry to Treasury Board. It's a bit of a surprising move, and many have speculated as to why that's happened. But at the end of the day, it's a decision that is surprising, slightly concerning, to be honest with you. Anita was a fantastic minister under procurement during the pandemic. She helped deliver vaccines to millions of Canadians, and certainly when she came into the Ministry of Defense, she did a fantastic job uh, as the war in Ukraine began, and as the illegal Russian invasion began in Ukraine, and she helped really guide Canada through that for the last year and a half. And so Bill Blair, who has had his own controversies in his own ministry before this, coming into the Ministry of National Defense, it's a bit of a surprising move, and one that many politicos are surprised about, but also one that the international community is a bit surprised about, because given everything that's happening with the war in Ukraine.
Okay, yeah. So Anita Anand is actually really liked. She's actually my MP. And okay, so our next question is this cabinet shuffle setting the stage for an election?
No, I think quite the opposite. I think this is a chance for the Liberal government to renew themselves and to get back on track with some of the priorities that they promised Canadians in 2021. And of course, a lot of that has to do with how effectively the departments are managed. And so this is an opportunity for the Liberals to reinvigorate themselves, to get back on track. And at this point, it's a pretty major shuffle. I mean, we had turnover with 30 or so ministries. So that's a huge change. And given that, I think we're going to be looking at an election probably into late 2024, early 2025 at this point, because it's they want to show Canadians that this is our new team, and we're going to deliver on the priorities that matter most to them. So I think it's going to be a bit in the future at this point.
Okay, and before I get to my next question, just a quick follow-up to that one. Many people are saying that this could be setting the stage for an election, and especially today, whenever Prime Minister Trudeau was asked if he's willing to not break his supply and confidence agreement with the NDP. When he was asked that, he didn't give a direct answer. And I find that whenever someone doesn't give a direct answer, it's either they haven't made their decision yet, or they are not willing to commit to what the question is asking. So do you think that he could keep his supply and confidence agreement with the NDP until 2025? Or do you think this is what this cabinet shuffle is really about? What many people are saying is putting a new leadership in the Liberal Party, bunch of new people up front, and going hard into the next election to defeat Pierre Poilievre's Conservatives.
Well, you touched on an interesting point. Cabinet shuffles are primarily used to elevate people and elevate backbenchers into ministerial positions so they can shine and bring new messaging, new approaches to cabinet, and to really stir and to get things going on the right track again. So I think with 7 or so new ministers, backbenchers elevated to the ministries, I think it's really more of them trying to set the record straight and say, Canadians have been dealing with a lot since the pandemic, and we haven't always handled situations, properly. And they want to reinvigorate themselves and get back into line, so to speak. But in terms of the NDP, I think it's just going to continue on as long as they make progress on the priorities that the NDP has really set up, like for example, dental care. They're moving forward with dental code. They'll have Canadians will have dental care by, I believe, 2025, at least those earning under $90,000. So as long as the Liberals keep delivering on the NDP priorities, I don't see any reason as to why the NDP certainly don't want an election. I don't think the Liberals want an election. They saw, how jumping into an election in 2021 was, could backfire. So I don't think they're trying to avoid that. And at this point, the Liberals have been in power for almost, what is it, 9 years now? Oh, no, 8 or 9 years at this point. And they're just going to continue to stay in power as long as the NDP support them. So I don't see an election anytime soon.
And I apologize, Elliot, again before I haven't even got to my next question yet. But another follow-up to that one, I heard an interesting theory that the economy and just things in general would just get worse going into 2025. So could a possibility for an election be that the Liberals, while they're still not going great, but before they go even terrible and before the Liberals are almost guaranteed a loss in the 2025 election, if that happens, do you think that the Liberals would call an election now when things aren't terrible yet, so that they can maybe win and have time to fix those mistakes by the next election, which would be probably, I don't know, 2027 or 2028?
I think affordability is a huge factor on the minds of so many Canadians right now. And that being said, I hear what you're saying. Like, is it going to get more affordable? Is it not? Right now, inflation is going down. It's down to about 2.8%, and mostly because gas prices are going down across the country. So there are signs that the economy isn't going completely south. I believe we're the best in the G7 at this point for our inflation numbers, and things are progressively getting, uh, slightly better in this country for affordability. I mean, obviously there's issues. Grocery prices are still high, housing is still high, but this cabinet shuffle was really an opportunity for new faces to step in and try their hand. Even, for example, housing. I mean, right now housing is, it's such a big factor in how Canadians vote, and it's such a pressing issue for affordability. Sean Fraser is now the new housing minister. He was a bit of a rising star in the immigration file, and so moving them housing is an opportunity for um, not only things to change, but also for the Liberals to communicate their message better with Canadians about how they're making housing more affordable. So I think there's still a lot to see in the next year and a half, and it's tough. A week in politics changes a lot. So I'm not so sure that we can look forward that far into the future at this point. And
Yeah.
right now, the new cabinet's going to be focusing on their priorities. So.
Back to our preset questions to the cabinet shuffle. So, what happens to legislation now? For example, Bill C-21 and the bail reform bill under former Minister of Public Safety, I guess, rather, and the former Minister of Justice. They were both under their names, which they've been dropped from cabinet. So, will they become private members' bills, or will they die out? What happens now that they're not government legislation?
That's a great question. I'll be honest with you, I'm not an expert in the House procedures. My understanding is that the new Justice Minister may push similar legislation, um, either slightly amended or under the current bill. But at the end of the day, the priorities pretty much remain the same. It's not going to change. Whether the name of the bill or the contents of the bill will change is a different story, but the priorities remain the same, and it's just a matter of delivering on those priorities. And I think you said the Minister of Justice. I mean, we have a new Minister of Justice. Arif Virani is now the MP. The MP for Parkdale High Park is now the Minister of Justice, and he's a very hardworking MP, uh, one of the hardest working on the Hill, arguably. And it's now his job to really set the priorities, and that's really what this cabinet shuffle was about. So it will be interesting to see how that legislation gets through now. I wish I was an expert on procedure, but I'm not. But the priorities will continue into 2025 if if we don't have an election before that. So
Yeah, and the hard thing is now the Bill C-21 that has been in Parliament for a very long time. The not unlike the bail reform bill, which hasn't even been touched on, but that much. But Bill C-21, the firearms legislation, has been in Parliament for such a long time. So would we just go back to phase one right now and go through that all over again? And potentially have the legislation passed by the end of the current government's term, or like it seems really hard for me to imagine all this legislation going all the way back to phase one and having to work its way up again, even though Bill C-21, for example, it's been a long process and it's still not over yet.
yeah, and I hear you, and that's going to be a challenge for this government to figure out. This is one of the largest shuffles in cabinet in recent Canadian history. So it's going to be a stepping stone, and the government's going to have to get over some roadblocks in terms of these priorities that they want to deliver for Canadians. But I think you also touched upon something that I also want to discuss, and it's that Marco Mendicino is now out of cabinet with the public safety file, and Dominic LeBlanc is going to be the new public safety minister, and I think he has a couple of other. I think he remains intergovernmental affairs minister. He's keeping some of the titles. The titles have shifted also, which is interesting to note. But Dominic LeBlanc is going to have he's going to have quite a challenging ministry and quite a challenging department to take care of now with the whole situation with Paul Bernardo and the gun reform legislation, like you mentioned. So he's going to have a tough time to ensure that everything is in place. But obviously, Marco Mendicino has now left cabinet, so it does show you in terms of performance. But Dominic LeBlanc is going to have a tough job there. So.
Okay,
Okay, so we just mentioned former Justice Minister Lametti. Why do you think he was removed from cabinet?
From my understanding, David Lametti is going to be moving on from politics. So that's what sources have said. But I don't believe it was a case of removal. I think it's mostly the fact that he's just done with politics. He had a great run as Justice Minister and as an Attorney General. He's helped implement 12 bills into a law in Canada. So he's served his time. He's he's accomplished quite a bit for Canadians, and he just said, "That's it. I'm hanging up the boots. I'm going to go into the private sector because public life is difficult." I mean, I don't blame the guy. It's tough being at the forefront of everything in Canada. So I believe it's just him leaving at this point and retiring from politics.
Okay. And so with all these ministers gone, I think there was seven of them. There was seven new Liberal MPs who were added to cabinet. So, and some of them I've never heard of, and some of them kind of surprised me that they were being added to cabinet. In fact, I don't think there was one of that. Well, there was I think there was definitely at least one or two who I did hear of. But do you think that there could have been some better MPs placed in cabinet that were more well known to the public?
I think you have to really think about the dynamics here in play. You have to think about regional representation. You have to have a gender balanced cabinet. Well, since 2015 at least, that's what Trudeau has been doing. And by the way, that is the case again. You have to think about LGBTQ2S representation as well, and there's three people that identify with that community as well. So all these considerations have to be taken into place. But I do think it's a solid group of people. You have MPs that have been there since 2015, like Arif Farani, who's been a backbencher, is now elevated into the Justice Ministry position. You have new MPs or relatively new MPs like Rishi Valdez from Mississauga Streetsville. She's elevated into the small business portfolio. And she's someone who has been known to be a community-driven leader and somebody who's been great at connecting with various ethnic communities. So having her as a diverse woman in politics is just great for representation all around. And there's new MPs like Terry Beach, who has been around for a while, the new Citizen Services Minister, which is, by the way, a new position, I believe. So that's interesting. But I think they have a good crew coming in. There's, of course, I'm surprised about a few people that didn't make the list. Anna Gainey in NDG Westmount isn't at the cabinet, despite being, the past party president and very close friends with Justin Trudeau. So, a few surprises there, but overall, I think I'm glad that new younger MPs are being elevated to these positions.
But another thing is they want to, like you said, regional representation. They also want to win the next election. They want to put members of parliament in there as cabinet ministers, because having a cabinet minister as an incumbent in an election is also a boost. So if I focus in on one riding, I just pulled up the polls from 338 Canada in Kingston in the Islands. The MP is Mark Garretston. So he's been a dominant figure in the House of Commons, but they're only labeled as a likely Liberal hold, and he's only up 30. He's at 37%, and the NDP's at 29%. So with the Conservatives actually only at 26%. So it's really like not a huge margin. It's not a safe hold for them, and Mark Garretston being the dominant figure he is within the Liberal Party, whether it's in the House of Commons, or so on. Why do you think he was not elevated to cabinet? Because that could be two boosts for them. That could be a boost for them in an electoral victory, and he also has seemed to be a very dominant figure within the Liberal Party.
Yeah, I hear you. Look, at the end of the day, I think a lot of MPs have their head in their hands and are disappointed about this because a lot of them have been there since 2015, like you said, and they haven't been able to move up the ranks and become a minister. And honestly, that may lead to more. At least I'm seeing reports from David Aiken, who said that that may lead to more MPs
Yeah.
going away and leaving politics, just like the members that have been demoted from cabinet. So, I think a lot of people have some thinking to do, and they won't have a chance probably to get into cabinet until after the next election, if the Liberals, of course, are successful. So, yeah, there's a lot of considerations, but again, a big thing in this is regional representation and diversity representation, gender representation. So, unfortunately, that's left a lot of MPs out in the dark.
Okay, so could you explain the decision making leading up to the cabinet shuffle?
I wish I was a part of that process. It's all been speculation for me. I haven't been involved in that. PMO does extensive uh, research about what these MPs' background is. Have they been in any sort of controversies? That's why you haven't seen the likes of George Chahal, who after the 2021 election, and this is just speculation on my end, but after the 2021 election, he was caught taking out opposition, his conservative opposition, his pamphlets out of doors in his riding. So, whether that was punishment for previous acts or not, all these factors are really considered before a cabinet shuffle happens. And PMO really goes through this list extensively and tries to meet all these quotas and thinks about the political repercussions of their choices. So, and just like I was saying, like a lot of people are disappointed, sure, with this, especially if you're an MP without a cabinet position, and you've been there since 2015. But there are so many just criterias that have to meet that.
And a follow-up to that one, you mentioned in there that a controversy matters whenever selecting new cabinet ministers. Now, if I go back to my original question or follow-up question that I gave to you before about Mark Gerritsen, which I still have some questions about. He's been although he's a dominant figure within the Liberal Party, the conservatives like a lot of conservatives like to I don't want to use the word attack, but
Mhm.
well, even attack him from the other side of the House of Commons. He's a target for conservatives because he stands up there and he reads out no, like talking points, but he's again, he doesn't have a strong electoral the polls are in his favor, but they are not entirely in his favor as they would be in Stormont, Dundas, South Glengarry for the conservative incumbent. There's only 37% to 29%. That's not a huge gap. It's under 10%. So why wouldn't, is it because of controversy and the amount of conservatives who like to target him that he was not placed in cabinet? Or I still don't understand why he wasn't placed in cabinet.
Well, he's certainly a vocal voice. There's no denying that. He's very vocal on social media and whatnot. But I really can't get into that speculation because I believe it's the regional factors and it's the gender factors. I think there's so much behind the scenes that, frankly, we don't know that goes on that is really the prominent choice, prominent reason a lot of people haven't been put into cabinet. We have to remember there's only 7 new faces into cabinet. 30 are being shuffled in their spots. So at the end of the day, yes, a lot is changing and some new people are coming in, but it's not like we have a lot of new people coming into cabinet. So those that are new and those that are coming into cabinet, very diverse. We have Gary Anita Anand from Scarborough coming into the Crown Indigenous Relations Office. We have a few Quebec MPs. Soria Martinez Fernandez is now the Tourism and Quebec Economic Development Agency Minister. So a lot of different factors go into this. Why Mark Gerritsen isn't in there, I can't speak directly for that because, frankly, I don't know. But it does lead to some frustration. I'll say that.
Okay. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Oh yeah, okay. So, could you tell us more about the cabinet and why these ministers got their particular roles?
That is that's a tough question to answer because there's so many factors in that. But I mean, the reality is a lot of these people are very experienced. They've either been MPs since 2015, or they have been maybe some of them have been ministers since 2015. Um, so, in the cabinet, for all your listeners out there, is so important because they're the ones that not only control the departments and the budgets for the departments, but they help the prime minister um, make all the decisions, and they certainly guide him with advice and strategic planning and whatnot to help keep our country going. So it really has to do with the different experiences that they've had, um, and just like for example, Stephen Guilbeault, he remains at Environment and Climate Change at that ministry. And before that, he was an activist and I believe the executive director. I'm not 100% sure if that was his title, but nonetheless with Green Pack. So, or is it Greenpeace? Either way, environmental organization. So it's really based on all their experiences, what their history is, and whatnot. So that's usually how ministers are chosen for their positions.
Okay. And could their future in this role also affect the decision making? Because, for example, the new House leader, I believe it's Karina Gold, she will not be a House leader for the start, I think, or at least into the next sitting next fall because
Mhm.
she's going on leave because I believe she's pregnant. But Could that affect the decision making too? Because now we've got the whips, all the whips who are taking over the House Leader position, which also could change because all of a sudden people are doing positions that they are not that they're not respectively assigned to. The deputy whip's taking over the chief whip, the whip's taking over the House Leader. So could again, if I know I keep going back to him in particular, and even his kind of partner Kevin Lametti, who is Parliamentary Secretary of the House Leader, and Mark Garriston, who is Parliamentary Secretary of the House Leader in this, of the Senate. So do could they since if they have to look into her future and they know that she's not going to be in this role for very early on, could they be like, you know what, if she cannot be in the role very early on and until she can get into the role, could they appoint, instead of rearranging the whips and everything like that, could they put Kevin Lametti and Mark Garriston, who are parliamentary secretaries to the House Leader, could they put them into those roles temporarily?
I believe there is a line of succession in terms of that. And I will say also congratulations to Karina Gould for announcing her pregnancy. All the best to her. She was a fantastic minister, and she's a great communicator. So I think she will do a fantastic job in her role as a House Leader. But there is a line of succession. I believe the chief government whip takes over as House Leader, and then the deputy chief government whip takes over the chief government whip position in the time being. So they do switch around. But to address a different part of your question, you said, well, let me just say, in an ideal world, the ministers are, their profession and their background is based on the work that they do. So take Mark Holland, the new Minister of Health. I mean, it would be fantastic if he was a doctor, right? But he never worked in any sort of healthcare capacity. Or Bill Blair. I mean, he was a police chief in Toronto, so that's somewhat similar to his new position in defense, but I don't believe he's ever been served in the military. Maybe wrong on that, but I don't believe so. So, in a perfect world, these politicians serve as the ministry with one that they're experienced with. But in practicality, they're going to have to learn their files, and they're going to have to learn their new files fairly quickly because there's a lot of discontent with this government at times, especially with public safety, for example. Dominic LeBlanc, who is certainly, I mean, he's been in there since 2015, but so he knows a lot about the ongoings. But nonetheless, he's going to have to learn his file quickly. So it really experience matters in these roles, and in a perfect world, they would be fit for the roles. But right now, a lot of these ministers are going to have to go in there and learn a lot about their topics in a fairly short amount of time, because who knows when the next election is going to be.
Okay, and you mentioned that they need to have background, or they don't need to have background, but you said in a perfect world, Mark Holland would be a doctor, or Bill Blair would have been in the military. So going back, the new House Leader, Karina Gould, if for these first few months or whatever, while she is not going to be serving as House Leader until she comes back, could you take advantage of the two parliamentary secretaries who are good performers in the House of Commons and in the Liberal Party? Could you let them take over, or at least one of them take over Karina Gould's role until she gets back, instead of and because I know you said there's a line of succession, but you've got Kevin Lametti who's already in the kind of the House Leader area. He's the parliamentary secretary. So could he step up and take that instead of rearranging something else, since he's already in that kind of role?
So are you talking about before Karina Gould goes on maternity leave?
Yeah, before she, or whenever she does go on maternity leave and she cannot be House Leader for I don't know how many months, but until while she's gone, instead
Mhm.
instead of going with the line of succession, what could you just take the parliamentary secretary of that role? And that could go for any minister too. Minister of Health, they leave the
Gotcha.
parliamentary secretary to
No,
the Minister of
I
Health.
get the gist for sure. I get the gist of your question. I think there is an opportunity to elevate the parliamentary secretaries because, in theory, the parliamentary secretaries are the ministers in waiting. Whether that's been the case practically is a different question since 2015 and in the Harper years as well. But yes, I mean, I think there's an opportunity to elevate ministers parliamentary secretaries across the board and really put a spotlight on them. But I think this is a bit more of a systemic question where a lot of the parliamentary secretaries who were waiting um, for a position as a minister did not get that this time around. And I think that the government really needs to use the parliamentary secretary title as a stepping stone for the minister, so that new backbenchers don't just come in blindly into positions, into the departments as ministers, but they have experience in the role as a parliamentary secretary first. Um, because if you like I was taking Mark Holland for example, he's not a doctor, and I don't believe he's ever worked in the healthcare sector. But if he was the parliamentary secretary to the Minister of Health, I mean, certainly he can learn the role and really participate in that so he can understand it. But again, that's a systemic issue that I think governments need to address.
Yeah, and exactly like what you said there. Even referencing to Mark Holland, and nothing against Minister Gould, but if I forget what role she was in first, if she ended up staying in that particular role or got a different ministerial job title, if we went by your statement there, could do you think it should be Kevin Lamoureux who takes it, being the Parliamentary Secretary to the Leader of the Government in the House of Commons, or do you think it should be any minister?
Um, well, in a perfect world, that's how it works.
Yeah.
But I mean, at the end of the day, you really need to fill positions with good communicators. And Karina Gould is certainly someone who has been a great communicator, has really thrown contrast to the conservatives. And I mean, when I was working at the Liberal Party of Canada, a lot of the things we would tweet out and retweet were from Karina Gould because she has a way of crafting her messaging and really getting it out in a simple way for Canadians to listen to. So, you know, I think in a perfect world, that's how it should work. A stepping stones for ministry positions would be great, but in practice, with so many criterias that the government has to meet, gender, uh, with representation in terms of like different parts of different provinces and territories, I think you get into a lot of problems and a lot of problems in succession planning because that's just not how it works in practice.
Okay, so what's next in the cabinet shuffle?
Well, I think this is the last cabinet shuffle before the next election, or maybe one or two being shuffled or mixed up, just like there were in the previous minor shuffle, if you can even call it that. But this is the last cabinet shuffle before the next election. And these ministries will be tasked with really spreading the government's message. And they'll be preparing for an election soon. I mean, I see the Liberal Party of Canada has already started hiring. And full disclosure, I'm no longer with the Liberal Party of Canada. So I feel like I can maybe say this, but they've already begun hiring candidate liaisons. So they're slowly preparing for it. They're not going to be rushing into an election, but these cabinet ministers will be tasked with delivering the message and delivering on the priorities. We want accomplishments before the next election. We want to say that we passed legislation and we're making real change for Canadians. So they'll be tasked with really delivering on the priorities before 2025, and they'll really have to pull their weight to do that because Canadians are facing a lot of challenges these days, especially with affordability. So they're really going to have to be on the ball and deliver for Canadians. And once the election comes, they'll be wanting to say, look at what we've accomplished.
Okay, you have the last word here. Give us your last thoughts.
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. This has been a great discussion. You guys are incredibly talented as well. For being young journalists is just such an incredibly important thing for our democracy and also for civic engagement. You guys are the reason young people want to get involved in politics. So thank you for that. In terms of the cabinet, well, I think we're going to see how some of these new ministers are going to thrive in their new positions or not thrive, and that a lot of the experienced ministers will really have to help them along the way because there's a lot of files that we're going to have to face in right before the next election. So a lot of issues and a lot of challenges we're going to have to face as a country and certainly as a government. So I think we'll see how that goes, and we're slowly preparing for the next election to happen in 2025. But other than that, they're going to have to continue to deliver on affordability and on the priorities that matter to Canadians.
All right, Dmytro Basmat, thank you for making the time.
Absolutely, thank you for having me, and yeah, I will look forward to hearing the podcast.
Joining us now is Rayn Asaria and Joshua Oliverio to discuss the latest with the federal Liberal cabinet shuffle. So we'll start with Rayn. Or Joshua, I mean, can you explain to our viewers what happened today?
Sure. So, first of all, thanks for having me on. Great opportunity, and I love the work that you two are doing. So basically what happened today is the Prime Minister has a group of MPs that he assigns to be his advisors, and they're members of the cabinet. And what we see is every once in a while, the Prime Minister says, I want to change the people that are advising me and are on my senior leadership team. So that's what we saw today. Today was not just a normal cabinet shuffle. Almost every minister had a new portfolio, and we had 7 new ministers. I can't just understate how unprecedented that tends to be in Canadian politics, where we have basically all but 7 ministers changing jobs. If you're looking for specifics of some interesting things that happened in the shuffle, Anita Anand, the Minister of Defense, moved to a less prominent role, but still a very important role. Couple ministers were dropped from cabinet. So Marco Medicino, who has seen a lot of controversy in the last couple months and definitely in the last couple of years, with a lot of controversies around his department. We also saw a very big departure in justice. So the Minister of Justice, David Lametti, this is kind of a surprise to everyone. We have a new Minister of Justice, actually a rookie minister. And we're trying to actually figure out why David Lametti was removed from cabinet, because as far as we can tell, it was the Prime Minister was satisfied with the work. We didn't hear anything that they weren't. There weren't any sort of major controversies. There was one little incident that happened earlier this year with a Conservative MP. But other than that was the big takeaway for me today, is that the Prime Minister made some very significant changes.
Okay, so what is the most shocking thing about this cabinet shuffle? We'll start with Ryan.
So I think the most shocking but surprising thing today was seeing that Omar Al-Ghabra announced he was no longer seeking re-election. He was an extremely valuable cabinet minister, holding the positions of Minister of Transport most recently, and formerly Parliamentary Secretary to the Prime Minister. I think everybody will miss Mr. Al-Ghabra, but I feel like everybody else that's new in the cabinet or that has a new portfolio will succeed and will go in the right direction in the future.
Something I was wondering for what you just touched on, Minister Al-Ghabra. So it seemed like many ministers just decided that they're not going to run and it all seemed like they all announced it on one day. So, Rayn, and even if Joshua wants to chime in on this one too, but what I'm wondering is, was there any were they planning on doing that, or did they know that they were going to be shuffled out of cabinet, so they decided to, after the former Minister of Mental Health, Carolyn Bennett, decided to decide she's not going to run in the next election? Do you think everyone just decided, you know what, if we're all going to be dropped anyways, we just will not run, we'll step away now? Or do you think they were just not going to run anyways, Joshua?
So the Prime Minister's office called every minister in May asking what their intentions were for the next election. And if they told the Prime Minister that they weren't going to run again in the next election, they're not going to be in cabinet, because the Prime Minister needs a team, and it's pretty common practice across the world in parliamentary democracies that if you're not sticking around for the next election, you can't be in cabinet. The only one that I would question of those sudden or announcements for retirement would be Omar Al Gabra. He was on my card to be dropped from cabinet, even if he didn't retire. So my guess is the Prime Minister's office might given him a heads up and said, look, you're not going to be in cabinet. You can either retire or resign, or the Prime Minister's going to remove you. That's the only case where I think that an ultimatum was given.
Yeah, okay. So this question is for Joshua. So is there any other Liberal MPs that you could have been decided to be in the cabinet?
Yeah, that's a good question, and there's a couple that came to mind immediately. Two that I'll say right now. Greg Fergus, who right now is the Parliamentary Secretary to the Prime Minister. He's already a member of the Privy Council, so that would make a natural stepping stone into cabinet. The second name is Rachel Bendayan, the member of Parliament for Outremont, which is Tom Mulcair, the old leader of the NDP. That's his riding. Both of them have shown extreme loyalty to the government and are usually the two that are standing up in the House of Commons defending the government. Those two definitely had cabinet aspirations, and frankly, I've been hearing from other journalists that I saw online that there are a significant number of Liberal MPs that didn't even get a call from the Prime Minister to even evaluate whether they were going to be in cabinet. So those are the two that come to mind, but I assure you that there are MPs that are definitely disappointed, and I think we're going to start seeing a lot of MPs announcing that they're not going to be sticking around for the election in 2025.
And before we get to Rayn, I just want to ask you a follow-up to that question. So what about, there was two other significant ones. They seem to be they stand up a lot on the Liberal side of the House of Commons. Mark Garriston and Kevin Lametti, they are big during Opposition Day motions, especially for some of the foreign interference. Do you think I was pretty sure they would be welcomed into cabinet. So do you think they were offered? Because they seem to be very busy during question period, especially when the Prime Minister, most ministers aren't there.
Yeah, it's a good observation. You're right that both Kevin Lametti and Mark Garriston are very frequent flyers in the House of Commons. The reason for that is that they're both parliamentary secretaries to the government House Leader, which means that they don't have a lot of experience in managing or helping to manage a ministerial portfolio. Being able to stand up and debate motions and just follow government talking points is a big challenge, is harder and a different skill than being able to run an entire department responsible for sometimes hundreds of billions of dollars of taxpayers' money. So I think that before Mark Garriston and Kevin Lametti end up in cabinet, they need to end up at a position, parliamentary secretary position, that frankly is more of a substantive role.
Oh, and Ryan, what are your last thoughts? We'll give you the last word on this matter here today.
So, yes, I think the Liberal Trudeau government was really sensing they were facing a hard time. We've seen that their approval rating has been dropping lately, and in fact, there was a poll that was released a few days ago that showed if an election was held today, the Conservatives would take some of the ruling seats in the House of Commons. There are so many issues here in Canada and abroad with Eastern Europe and other challenges abroad, and I feel like the government was having a hard time, and I feel like these new cabinet ministers will really try to help Justin Trudeau, Chrystia Freeland, and the main cabinet team, and I hope that they can succeed and improve the lives of all Canadians.
All right, Rayn Asaria and Joshua Oliverio, thank you for making the time and thank you for speaking on this matter with us tonight.
Thank you very much. Pleasure.